Welcome, everyone, to the Fusionary Health podcast. Today, I have an incredible guest in store for you, Natalie Niddam. And I have been following Natalie for a while now, admiring her content, really enjoying her emails. She's very much a person who's teaching us so much on the cutting edge of biohacking and health and all the different tools we can use. So thank you, Natalie, for coming onto the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Shivani. I'm excited for this conversation. I really enjoyed meeting you in person, and I think I can't wait to dive into your wisdom one day. So this is going to be fun. Just the beginning.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, I want to first dive into your story so people understand who you are, what it is you teach, and what you're about. So will you share that first before we dive into our topics today? And our topics today are going to be around peptides, bioregulators, and then biohacking, because I honestly am pretty clueless about peptides and bioregulators. So before you came on, I took a deep dive in and I was like, wow, this is a lot of new science to me. So I'm excited for you to kind of unpack that for our audience and share what is this new science that's probably also old science, very proven science that can support us on our health journeys.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting that the new and the old definitely intersect in all spaces, right? But my story really is that I started off my academic career studying human physiology, and I kind of got a little sidetracked in my teens. I ended up kind of in the corporate world for decades. And it wasn't until about 12 years ago that I woke up one morning and thought, yeah, you know what? This is not working for me. And I went back to school. I became a nutritionist. And then I got really interested in biohacking actually before I went back to nutrition school. And so as a matter of fact, when I registered for school in nutrition, I was very nervous because I kind of had a foot firmly planted in biohacking by then. The whole paleo diet movement at the time, even the bulletproof diet was really big then. And I was like, I was just really worried that academically things were going to lean in a very different way. And the good news is I was pleasantly surprised. I mean, obviously the curriculum was very varied. I mean, we even covered things like Ayurveda. I mean, we barely brushed on Ayurvedic medicine. Let's be clear. You can't do 5,000 years of medicine in anything less than a lifetime of study. But we kind of brushed up on those things and really set a really nice foundation to springboard off of. And I remember when we graduated, the woman who ran the school saying to us, just so you know, this is when your education really begins, when you get out into the world and you start to ask the questions, and we're giving you the foundation for learning, and you kind of go from here. And so off we went, and my journey took me into this realm of biohacking, then into the realm of epigenetics, and then the last thing that I really came across that really kind of shook me was this whole area of peptides and peptide bioregulators. And so I've spent the last 12 years kind of digging in, leaning in, trying to learn myself as much of this stuff as possible. And so, like you, I ended up starting a podcast of my own like 3 years ago, which was the very origin of that podcast was really about how do I get people to talk to me who know so much more about this stuff, right? Because it's not always easy to get information on this stuff. So that was the driver behind the podcast. And I've kind of never looked back. As you know, once you start a podcast, it's just this invitation from the universe to just learn about things. Like it's just amazing. It's just the best education on the planet.
It is. It very much is. And the reason I started my podcast was I've created a supplement company about 8 years ago, Fusionary Formulas. And as I was creating the product and I was meeting with practitioners week after week, I just learned so much from them. And I was like, wow, if the whole world just understood that these doctors and practitioners are so smart. And I have these profound conversations and I leave so encouraged about what's possible for our health, what a different world we would have. And so that was the premise. And so that's why I interview holistic orthopedics to, there's so much in between the black and the white that the world sees. And my goal is to show that density, that variety that exists in there too.
100%. Yeah.
So I have a question first, because I follow you and I see your emails and everything. In terms of all the fun biohacking tools out there, there's so many. And I think it can get overwhelming, Even for myself, I've been to the Dave Asprey conference. I tried a lot of the tools. I loved all of them. I would love $20,000 to build like a wellness biohacking room in my house with with everything. But if you had to drill down into like the handful of tools that you think move the needle the most for the population who is health interested, longevity interested, and interested in reversing the health issues and diseases that most people are somewhat carrying when it comes to autoimmune, leaky gut, gut dysbiosis, and these kinds of issues, what are some of your favorite go-tos where you're like, if the whole world just used a few, we'd have a different world?
Yeah. So my answer to this question might disappoint some people. I actually think none. I think the most powerful thing we can do, and this is one of the real it's the tension in the biohacking space, and that is that the first thing that people need to do is take care of the foundation.
Yeah.
The most powerful thing people can do for their health is to make sure that they're doing whatever it takes to optimize their sleep, that they've really dialed in their diet, that they've really, gotten a handle on stress, which doesn't mean you knock it out, because of course you can't knock out stress, but that you take the time to look for what are the strategies and the ways that I can help to manage the impact of stress on myself. And that we move our bodies, that we exercise, that we get outside, that we get out into nature. And once you've gotten that in place, and now the next level above that now is, what's my hormone balance like? Are my hormones balanced? Because these are foundational things that have to be in place before we can really look to optimize. And after that, and I don't even know if it's after or concurrently, what about your digestion? Is your digestion good? Because if your digestion's not good, you can be eating the best food on the planet. Nothing's getting in. Your body can't assimilate. It can't use the nutrients, right? So it's not the fancy answer. It's not the amortal chamber or the biocharger or any of those crazy things. It's taking care of that first. And once we've done that, now we can say, okay, so now what are the tools that really move the needle for people? And I would say that in terms of the biohacking tech, if you're a person that struggles, let's say, with balancing your nervous system, or, keeping balanced and managing your stress, then by all means, look to the tech, because the tech can really be helpful. If you've tried meditation and you're one of those people, which there are millions of you who are like, I cannot meditate to save my life. Like, I just can't do it. So if you can't meditate, then look at something like, there are things like the Apollo wearable or the Sensate, or there's some really interesting brain devices now that are coming out. Like, I'm just testing out a device called the Mendy, which is a neurofeedback device. Like, leaning into some of these technologies, give yourself the time and the space to shop around to see what resonates. Like, with Apollo, for example, you could wear it all day long and just program it to run, and nobody would know that you're wearing it. You don't even have to stop what you're doing, right? Yeah. With the Sensate, you do need to take some time out. You need to take 10 minutes, go into a quiet place, and give have this device. It's a vagal nerve toning device. It works with music. It's just a 10-minute, just 10 minutes.
Sure.
See which of these really resonates for you and go from there. Beyond that, in terms of mitochondrial health, cellular energy, having a good red light device is really powerful, right? Because it addresses so many things upstream. So whether it's a panel, which I'm a huge advocate of having a good quality panel. And if you've been looking at my content, you know that there's a company called LightPath LED. They have beautiful panels, and what they do is they don't just deliver the red and near infrared light, but they also offer the option to build in pulsing into the light. And there's a lot of really good science around different frequencies having different benefits, whether it's for the brain or for the nervous system or whatever the case may be.
Nice.
Then you get into the portable red light devices, right? So if you're someone who travels a lot, you might want one of those. And then I think the other big category, although it requires a bit of investment, is a good PEMF mat. So pulsed electromagnetic frequency mat. these are, again, they're foundational for healthy cells.
Sure.
Right. And then, we can go from there, but I would say, because people will say, well, what about cold? What about a cold plunge? And I think Ayurvedic medicine as a whole shudders at the whole concept of cold plunging. It's like,
You do.
Traditional Chinese medicine is like, are you kidding me? There's no way that's a good idea.
Exactly.
But let's put those guys aside from now and let's just say, okay, we have a different way of looking at things. Yeah. But you can use your bathtub, fill it with cold water, dump in a few bags of ice, and you're good to go. If you really wanted to cold plunge, right?
True.
But sauna would be another great biohack that it would be, if you had that room. And it doesn't have to be a big giant sauna. There's some great little saunas that are kind of like tents. Your head sticks out. They've even put red light, like near infrared light in there. Right. So if you had a sauna, a PMF mat, and a red light panel, I'd say you'd be in pretty good shape, right? Plus, if you needed a tool to help manage your stress, then because, managing stress, it's all fine and good and easy to say, but it's not that easy, right? Yeah. So anyway, hopefully that answers your question a little bit.
It's a great answer because part of what I love that you started with what I teach. You said, basically that's all of Ayurvedic medicine. You have to move, focus on the foundation, get outside in nature, focus on diet, focus on sleep, circadian rhythm. That's the bread and butter of what I'm trying to teach from Ayurvedic wisdom. So I was like, she's saying we don't need the tech and the tools. And then when you dove into the tech and the tools, it's like, what is the purpose? And are you going to use it? Are you going to be consistent? And the tools you mentioned, you could stick in a corner. It's a portable sauna. It's one panel. It's not a huge,
wall.
System. Yeah. And that is so important to moderate. Why are we reaching for the tool and will we really use it? Like I bought a Peloton and then I didn't use it. Gathered dust. I need to get rid of it. It's just sad now. Why? Because I love going to the gym. I love community. I love moving and sweating there, not here. And so I think it's just so important to be honest with yourself.
Yeah, no, that's such a good point. I mean, I'm lucky to have a Carol bike in my basement, which is, it can be used as a Peloton, but actually the beauty of this particular bike is that it's a 10-minute workout.
Nice.
And you can get it done. And, it's interesting because at the end of your ride, the nice little lady that lives in the computer says, congratulations, you've gotten your workout in for the day. Now you can go to the gym because you want to, not because you have to. Because you basically, in that 10 minutes, they've kind of packed in this crazy workout, which is really only 2 20-second sprints. But they've packed in this workout that delivers the benefits of like a 45-minute workout. And so that's when, but your point about are you going to use it is super important because I cannot tell you how many of all these pieces of equipment, but I remember walking into a biohacker's home and their sauna was in the corner. It was covered in clothes. Like they just never used it, right? Or bikes that just are used as clothes hangers. So, I think when you're going to invest in one of these pieces of technology, and honestly, they're great. Like the Carol bike is phenomenal. I've got a vibration plate. Like it's phenomenal. You have to mentally know, like understand why you're buying it, make a commitment to it, and create a routine around it, right? It's just like you have a routine around going to the gym. Create a routine around it, build it into your schedule like you would a meeting or a call or whatever the case may be, because none of this is going to work for you if it's sitting in the corner gathering dust. Like you'll think about it and you'll worry about it and you'll be like, oh my God, I spent all this money on this thing. It's just sitting there. Just use it.
Right.
Just use it.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think it's a powerful reminder because we sometimes are seeking for magic solutions and miracles instead of acknowledging like, hey, there's groundwork to be done. And on top of that groundwork, are you looking at your hormone health and gut health? Are you actually taking a deep dive enough to understand what's going on here? Because those are so key. And then let's enhance, let's invest in the enhancements, but at least we have a very strong foundation.
For sure. But, there's no doubt that things like PMF and even red light therapy, can form a part of your foundation, right? I mean, and if you think about what they're really doing, they're actually returning us access to elements of nature that we've lost because of our modern life, right?
Sure.
What is PMF? But, by walking barefoot on the ground, you would access,
Right.
those positive ions from the ground. Or, what is red light therapy but exposure to the sun's rays at the beginning and the end of the day,
Right.
and through the day. But we live lives where we've become completely disconnected from nature
True.
because of the world that we live in, not necessarily because we want to. I mean, I think you ask most people, yeah, I mean, I'd love to go for a walk in the park or a walk in the forest, but I don't have time. I mean, I've got to run here, there, and everywhere,
Right.
or you don't have access to it where you live. So these tools really can help us to reclaim even foundational health if we can afford them, as we're doing all of the other things. But as
Absolutely.
you say, but it is really about making a commitment to that practice and seeing it as a practice and not just a biohack. Because then with the biohack, we can always talk ourselves out of it. We can always disassociate from it and say, oh, well, it's not really that important, right?
Sure. And I think that's where it's so important to make the habits ingrained in your life. Like, for example, in pandemic times, I sat down and thought, what will I do to keep my family healthy through this time?
Yeah.
And I decided walking every evening was the best way because we'd reset, it would give you better sleep. We all moved more steps, all the things, and breathing in nature. And just recently this year, life got so busy, just so many opportunities and things coming at me. I stopped. And yesterday
Yeah.
I went for a walk and I put my feet in the grass and I was like, please take your own medicine. Because if not, we're not going to win here at anything. There's no point trying to teach Ayurveda if you're not resetting your own system. Then you're not coming from that whole balanced, nourished place from which you want to teach. And so, yes, I agree with you. It's just either or. It's like make time for the one or make time for the other, but make the time because otherwise we're really depleting. And that's why I think we feel so exhausted and fatigued and empty and frustrated and all the things people are feeling as in their bodies because we're not giving ourselves the nourishment we need one way or the other.
100%. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And the nourishment comes in many different forms, right? It's food, it's hydration, it's light, it's calm, it's
Yeah.
all the things.
Exactly. Beautiful. Well, I'd love to dive into the topic of peptides because I have no idea. Like I've heard about them because I walk into a lot of functional medicine practices and meet with different types of holistic integrative practitioners. And so I'd heard peptides. And I just assumed that when I needed them, someone would explain to me what this thing is and how it applies to us. So will you give us that overarching understanding and then also how it applies to different groups of people?
Yeah. So it's a big topic. But what peptides really are is they are essentially small proteins that are signaling molecules in the body. They are very often, peptides are, they're native to the human body, like they naturally occur. We make peptides in our own system. One of the most famous peptides is insulin.
Okay.
Right. So a peptide by definition is a protein that's 50 amino acids or less in length. But you have proteins in your body that are 100, 150, 200, like way huge. And then they're kind of like folded into these crazy origami shapes so that they can do what they do when they do it and can travel around in the body. But the peptides we're talking about are fragments of naturally occurring proteins in the body that have the ability to either attach to receptors on cell membranes and therefore initiate some kind of a cellular cascade, or they can influence the expression of genes. So that's what a peptide is. A subset of peptides that I know you also wanted to talk about are the bio-regulator peptides.
Right.
And so the bio-regulator peptides, these are the smallest of the small. They are only 2 to 4 amino acids long, and they are defined as peptides that have the ability to cross across the cellular membrane through the nucleus into the nucleus of the cell and influence the expression of genes by attaching to DNA. And so they can flip on and off genes and essentially help to restore function and regenerate tissues, glands, and organs at a cellular level.
That's amazing.
And yeah, that's kind of cool, right? Yes. You look like you have a question, so I'm going to let you ask your question
my
before
brain
I
is
just keep
processing.
yammering on.
And I'm like, we can turn on and off our genes just by eating horribly inflammatory foods as well.
Sure.
So it sounds to me at first, I was like, whoa, you're turning on your genes and turning them off. And I was like, well, we all do that as humans. So this is a very specific, positive way to get in there to create positive change if we know we need it.
Yeah. I mean, they're epigenetic switches, right? So what is epigenetic? It's essentially something that affects the expression of your genes from the outside. As it turns out, we do make all of these peptides in our bodies. It just turns out that number one, we make fewer of them as we age. And number two, sometimes when you're in a state where you've caused damage or there's a break or whatever the case may be, is it possible that by reintroducing therapeutic amounts of that fragment of protein, that we can help to restore balance in a system that's become unbalanced? So yeah. So the tricky thing about peptides in general right now is that the FDA has taken exception with them. And so, for a bunch of reasons that some people know and most people don't, I'm not fully clear.
Yeah.
But bottom line is, as of November 1st, they issued a letter to compounding pharmacies informing them that a list of, I think it was 28 peptides, could no longer be synthesized or sold by compounding pharmacies, which is honestly
cutting off access.
Well, and it's a horrible blow to functional and integrative medicine, because it's really in those circles where physicians and clinicians have been able to use peptides over the last number of years to affect conditions that are almost impossible to affect with drugs, or the drugs have so many side effects that people end up not that much better off than they were before.
Sure.
And so one of the reasons that the FDA gives is that there's not enough research, and there's just not enough known about them. And the unfortunate thing is that there's not a lot of the only people really doing, other than you, as far as I can tell, the only people doing clinical trials and research who are investing the money and the resources are big pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah.
And they're all in on peptides because they just launched 2 and are making $1 bajillion. They just launched the semaglutide as Ozempic and tirzepatide as Mounjaro. Right. And this is where they've taken peptides and they've modified them just a tiny bit to extend their half-life so that they influence the ability or the way that we maintain our body composition and many other things. Sure. So, they did the homework on that one and they totally hit a home run. But when it comes to things like a peptide like BPC-157, which stands for Body Protective Compound 157, this is a fragment of a protein that is naturally occurring in gastric juice in our bodies and is very, very powerful, both at helping to heal the gut, but helping to heal anything along the digestive tract from your mouth all the way to the outdoor, right? It also has been shown to be very effective at healing tissue, so muscles, tendons, ligaments, bones. It has protective effects on organs like the heart, the pancreas, the liver. It has protective effects for the brain. It helps to mitigate the negative effects of steroids and NSAIDs. Partially for the NSAIDs because it helps to heal the gut. So, NSAIDs we know can be quite damaging to the gut. Correct. That BPC-157 comes on board and it's triggering healing of the gut lining. So, there's I call it the Swiss Army knife of peptides.
Sure,
right?
It sounds like it. Like whenever I talk about curcumin and the science of curcumin, and I start listing off the science, and lately I've been speaking at more medical conferences, so I'm pulling the newer science through. And every time I'm like, this one plant does so much. If people just understood, they would take it every day. And like you mentioned, I am investing in the science because I want to prove my point. And it's going to take some time in my lifetime, but I don't mind because I have a lot of time on my hands. I have my longevity to invest in proving my point, which is curcumin can be such a powerful alternative or adjunct solution to the NSAIDs and these things that are damaging. But what you're saying is, this thing can be a powerful tool, adjunct tool for the clinicians to use in our bodies when we have things like leaky gut, gut dysbiosis, things that most of us have caused through antibiotic use and things that we've done in our lives. But it's going to be harder to get a hold of.
Yeah, so definitely the injectable. So the way that they're administered for the most part is by subcutaneous injection. So think of the way that a diabetic might inject insulin. It's just a tiny little insulin needle under the skin, and that's how most of the peptides are most reliably introduced. Now, BPC 157 is an interesting one because it originates in the gut. It actually gets a buy, and so it can be taken orally. So as far as I know right now, the FDA has not gone after oral BPC yet.
Got it.
As far as I know. That doesn't mean it's not coming down the pipes, but right now it doesn't seem that it doesn't look like it was on the list. What they really went after were the injectables.
Got it.
But you've also got peptides that are very powerful for the immune system. So thymus gland peptides, your thymus gland sits in your chest. It's your seat of your immunity. And we know it starts to involute very early in life. So if we could reintroduce peptides or bioregulators that help to either do what the thymus gland might have done or help to restore function to the thymus gland, we're in a space where we can improve our immune system. And we know, I mean, certainly from your work with curcumin, you would know this, the immune system dysfunction is at the root of pretty much any aging disease or chronic disease, whether it's inflammation or an overactive or an underactive immune system. Like those three things are probably the pillars of pretty much anything you can think of.
True. Very true. And so as you've been going down this journey with peptides, bioregulators, learning about it, applying it, what are some stories that you've seen people share around the benefits? I love sharing the stories because then people hear themselves in those stories and they hear hope for themselves.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's a tough one on the peptides right now because, I always worry, like, who's listening to this podcast? Am I promoting the use of something that's essentially illegal? But I can tell you that in terms of what I've seen things like BPC 157 be dramatically helpful for sports injuries, for example.
Okay.
So people who have, whether it's a strain or a break or they've pulled a muscle or they've torn something, BPC 157 over and over again delivers relief from the pain as well. And it's not just relief of the pain, because look, you could just go pop an ibuprofen or whatever and get relief from the pain to a point. But what BPC does is not only might it help to relieve the pain, but more importantly, it triggers the body to repair.
Nice.
So we see healing of injuries a little faster or a lot faster, depending on the situation, depending on a number of different factors. We could see much speedier healing than we would with anything else. And very often BPC 157 will be paired with another peptide by the name of thymosin beta 4 or its cousin TB500. Those two together are a very, very powerful healing stack.
Wow.
And so I've told this story 1,000 times. If anybody's listened to me before, they've probably heard the story, so they're yawning and rolling their eyes. But when I was first starting in this, I had a woman come to me who had a non-union joint fracture in her wrist. So this is like a little fracture, but they couldn't get it to heal. And so she was heading for surgery with an orthopedist, and she'd reached out to me. And at the time I was just getting started. So I reached out to my mentor and I said, okay, here's this person. What do we do? And so we created a protocol for her, which was BPC 157, thymosin beta 4, and two other peptides that are referred to as growth hormone secretagogues. So these are peptides that stimulate the brain to produce and release more growth hormone, which, this person was well into her 50s. So between the stress and the older age, we don't make as much growth hormone. So, which is one of the reasons why we don't heal as well as we get older.
Right.
So anyway, we put her on this stack, and I kind of forgot about it. And about 8-10 weeks later, I get an email from her saying, Nat, you're not going to believe this. not only have I gone from not being able to hold a coffee cup to being able to drink my coffee like a normal person, but I went to see my doctor and I don't need surgery anymore.
Wow.
In her case, those peptides is what it took to get her body to heal.
Wow.
The tissue. And I can't remember if at the time, if she was also using PEMF. Now,
Mhm.
PEMF would be another really powerful modality to help bone to heal.
Okay.
There's a lot of really good science around it. But on the peptide front, what's really interesting about that stack is that the growth hormone secretagogues that stimulate the release of growth hormone works synergistically really well with the BPC 157 because BPC 157 upregulates the expression of growth hormone receptors.
Hmm.
So imagine that there are more docking stations around for the growth hormone that you've now increased the production of.
Sure.
And so it just helps to speed healing along. So that's one story. I mean, lots of really great stories about people with gut issues who do a 30-day. Now, again, with the gut, like you've got to make sure you're taking away the things that are irritating the gut,
Of course.
right? Like you've got to remove those things, whatever they are. In some cases, it could be stress, it could be lack of sleep, it could be, athletes are notorious for having gut issues because they work out so hard that they damage their gut lining over time. So we have to make sure we've taken away the reason for the injury, but then introducing a BPC 157, even orally, can be really powerful for healing the gut lining. And, I would imagine pairing it with something like your Fusionary formula, which helps also to reduce inflammation.
Sure.
So you're putting out the fire and you're providing the stimulus for healing. Sorry, my nose is really itchy for some reason. You now get this really powerful 1-2 punch.
Absolutely. And I love that idea of synergistic effects. Like as you were speaking, I thought of microbiome labs, and we met at their conference, and I love their probiotics, and I take them and I recommend them to my clients. So if we took a great probiotic, take a great curcumin and turmeric, of course, we've got to put the fires out or we're not supporting, of course, diet adjustment. I laughed. So I was like, yes, thank you for saying that. People think that we can just reach for a tool and not take away the thing causing the fire and the problem. So of course, we have to be reminded of that. And then lastly, add this super tool, this Swiss Army that you're talking about that has a different effect. And I think that's also so powerful because oftentimes we're banging our head against the wall, trying to solve a problem in the same way forever. I have found that about myself. I'll do the same thing for years. And then finally I'm like, I have to change something. Something has to change. And then I start to change the formula of my approach. And then all of a sudden you're getting a different result. Yeah, it can cause some pain. I'm trying a new workout style. It can cause some wear and tear. But also, if you don't change the inputs, you're not going to get a new output. So why not be open to something like this? A 30-day on anything. I always say, just try the formula for 30 days. You let me know what you think, because I'm very
100%.
confident of what the result will be. And so I love that. I love that you're sharing this new tool that I would assume over 90 to 95% people have just not heard of.
No, well, and it's been very under the radar. And it's funny, because when you operate in this world, you think, well, everybody knows this, right?
Yeah.
And everybody doesn't know this. And now I did 4 years ago, I started a Facebook community that was my first kind of foray into, okay, well, let's learn more about these things and let's get more people in here.
Sure.
And so that community is it's about 22,000 people now. It's huge. And there's a lot of people in there trading information, talking about stories. There's another very interesting peptide called GHKCU. People may have heard it referred to as the copper peptides.
Okay.
And it's fascinating because it's only 3 amino acids. So it kind of falls under the category of bioregulators, although bioregulators were developed and discovered by a physician and researcher in Russia by the name of Vladimir Kavinson. So he's got about almost 40 years of research behind bioregulators. GHK copper was discovered by an American doctor by the name of Dr. Lauren Pickart in the 1970s. And one of its hallmarks is that it's incredibly good for skin.
Oh.
And so it flips those genes, but there's a university in the US, I think it's Stanford, that that did a study on GHK copper and found that it flipped over 1,000 genes back to their youthful expression. So
Wow.
it's also a very powerful healing peptide,
Yeah.
because it can help to reduce scarring. So it helps to realign the fibers of the tissue that's healing. And it's incredible for skin. So you've got entire skincare lines that are that are blue because GHK copper is automatically blue.
Okay.
So entire skincare lines that actually use GHK copper as their central ingredient.
Wow, this is really interesting. Okay. I
Yeah.
mean, I think it's fun when you kind of start to explore the world of reversing your age. I think there's
Mhm.
multiple facets to that. There's reversing your age because you want to be functional and youthful. For me, I grew up seeing my family in India. Everyone was diabetic. And so
Yeah.
they led these incredible, successful lives, raised these amazing kids who were my parents and aunts and uncles. But that last quarter of life was horrible. It was Parkinson's, amputation, heart disease, quadruple bypass, all the things I watched. And I was like, this is horrible and this will not be me. And so I
Mhm.
have always been an explorer, always been a guinea pig. People call me all the time. They're like, you're a guinea pig. Tell me what I should do because I have this problem. And I'm like, I'm so honored that you are calling me to even ask. But yes, as we're on this journey of reversing our aging to be as vibrant and healthy as we can and have that quality of life. I'm not talking about reversing aging just because we want to look youthful, although that's fun too, to look
Yeah.
as vibrant as we can, as long as we can. I think it's so interesting that there's these tools available that you can interact with and play with. So I have two questions. Are there any negative effects to peptides in the body? And secondarily, if we wanted to get them from food or a source, I know I've heard you speak on organ meat. Are there any other ways? And then we will transition to my next question about vegetarianism, paleo, protein, amino acids, and how to get that nutrition we want.
Sure. So sorry, what was the first question?
Good question.
I got so invested in the second question, I forgot what the first question was. Oh, downsides
Yes.
to peptides. So that's a really good question. I would say that the times I've seen negative effects from peptides is generally when people don't know what they're dealing with and are just throwing a peptide at the problem,
Got it.
right? As far as we know, I haven't seen any serious downsides to peptides. Having said that, we do get, because it's become like the biohackers mecca, you have a lot of people coming into the space. They've heard from someone, there's this amazing thing out there. They're not particularly careful about how they source them, and you can get them on the internet from all kinds of places. You have to be really careful. Like, talk about a blind item. They could be impure. They could have impurities. Like, it could be not what you think is in the vial, like a million different things. Or they weren't able to get educated ahead of time, or they didn't hire someone to help them to understand. And I always say this to people, every day we get asked, what's the peptide for? Fill in the blank.
Right.
And the first question you have to ask is, and usually it's a symptom. And the first question you have to ask is, why is that symptom there?
Correct.
What is it that you're trying to affect? Because if you don't understand what the driver is of whatever the symptom is, you're not going to know what levers you want to be pulling and pushing to affect it. So one cautionary tale is, for example, there's a really great peptide called thymosin alpha 1. And it is an immune peptide, and it helps to bump up the function of the innate immune system.
Got it.
So, before you take thymosin alpha 1, and it can be really powerful for a million different things, but before you take thymosin alpha 1, you want to make sure that you want to bump up the function of your innate immune system.
Correct.
Right? It can be really helpful for people with certain autoimmune conditions, but it can also be throwing fuel on the fire for other people. So we need to make sure that we understand what and why we're doing it. Now, like I said at the very beginning of this segment, we don't have enough published research. We don't have enough placebo-controlled, double-blind studies comparing A against B yet. And the challenge is that there's not the funding for it. The pharmaceutical companies, if they're doing it behind closed doors, because what they want to do is to pay their bills. They want to modify them just a little bit so they can patent them. And there's a couple. Thymosin alpha-1 is a perfect example. It is a drug, but it's only been approved for hepatitis B. I think B and C maybe. It hasn't been approved, but it's incredibly powerful. Even there's studies that show that in elderly people, when they're getting, let's say an elderly person is getting a vaccine. So one of the problems with any vaccine is that it'll only be as good as the immune system response that your body mounts when you introduce the pathogen.
Sure.
And guys, I'm not being political about vaccines at all. I'm just giving an example here. So in elderly people, quite often they don't have the vaccine doesn't protect them because their immune system doesn't respond to the antigen, right?
Sure.
Well, there's a study that they did that showed that if they administered thymosin alpha-1 concurrently with the vaccine, their immune response was much better, and therefore the vaccine was able to work for them much better.
Wow.
So, but thymosin alpha-1 was basically taken off the market at the beginning of the pandemic in North America, which is unfortunate because it's approved for use in about 30 countries around the world as a drug, as a medication.
Okay.
And here it's not. So maybe it will be one day. Definitely it can be very, very helpful for like during cold and flu season to help the immune system kind of function a little bit better. But we're a little bit stuck on that front. So bottom line is, the other thing that can happen, is that in some cases, people's immune system can have a negative response to sorry, I'm on that V thing. Sorry. Let's push that out of the way. To certain peptides. So I have seen it with BPC1, not with BPC, with thymosin beta 4, one of the thymus peptides, and more frequently with the growth hormone secretagogues. So CJC1295 and ipamorelin. And for whatever reason, people will develop a welt at the site of injection.
Wow.
And that's your immune system saying, yeah, it's a no-go. We're not interested in this. Get it out. And occasionally people will push through and the immune system will back down. But more often than not, if they keep going, the immune response becomes more and more pronounced until, hopefully they're smart enough to stop before until happens, right? Until could, in a worst case scenario, become some kind of almost an anaphylactic reaction. So it can happen, but it's unusual and it's pretty easy to manage. Right?
Sure. So it sounds like what you're saying is it's important because of the nature of it. It is important to go under the guidance of someone who understands peptides. It's kind of like supplements. Even in the supplement sector, we're definitely being pushed down on in a lot of ways to function like pharma. It's extraordinary if people understood the level of testing and everything they want out of little tiny supplement companies. But we're having to meet certain standards. And if you are in this for the long game and you're in this for the end user, the person who's going to benefit from it, then that's an investment I'm willing to make all day because I want to be here to help people. But when it comes to peptides, it sounds like it's not you shouldn't necessarily just go buy one at the corner store and pop it like you do your turmeric or anything else. Like we have a little more play in supplements, and even in supplements, I would say we need to be a little cautious. First of all, we need to be very cautious about quality and where we're buying it from and the sourcing.
Yeah,
I see turmeric supplements sometimes and they have no black pepper or healthy fat. And I'm like, really, guys, it's called Google. Like it's kind of basic how to make a turmeric supplement. And then you have like medical grade potency and those different variations and gradations. So it sounds very much like a really cool sandbox to go explore in to get the power tools you want towards your health, but do it cautiously, like do it with awareness. And
with awareness and do your due diligence, right? Do your due diligence. And I would say, definitely the medical community, the functional medical community is doing everything they can right now to stand up to this recent movement by the FDA.
Sure.
And it's not about money. It's really about a tool that they have found to be so efficacious for patients who often have no other options. For example, there's a genetic condition called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, EDS, and in that community, they have a lot of laxity in their tissues, right? Because their body doesn't make collagen properly. And I've spoken to people in that community that BPC 157 and even GHK copper have been real game changers for them in being able to function properly. So, I think we have to hope that good sense prevails and that these doctors are able, there's one group in particular that's gone to great lengths. They've hired a lawyer. They're definitely trying to have a conversation with the FDA to say, look, this, let's figure something out here kind of thing.
Yeah. So you can use it when it's valid for your patients who need it.
Exactly. So, and then you asked about I don't know if you wanted to go into the vegetarian thing yet or not. So
my final question, because I know I can't keep you all day. You might have other meetings. When it comes to protein, because we're talking about amino acids, and I've heard you on other podcasts talk about how you could consume organ meat to get what's in these peptides, because they are amino acid chains. That could be one source. And I thought to myself when I heard it, I was like, I'm vegetarian. I don't consume bovine sources of collagen. I don't source organ meat or eat it. But I have been reading so much science on health and perimenopause and menopause and how we do need to increase our protein. We do need to build muscle. And so I have shifted my own diet and exercise and things. But anytime I go high protein as a vegetarian, all of a sudden I'm eating a lot more processed foods that might not suit. And so I just wanted you to share your thoughts on it, because when we talk about paleo, biohacking, all these things, a lot of times to get that health we want, we might have to make some tough decisions around how we're going to get the nutrient density we want with the low calorie solution, with the absorption to give the body everything it needs.
Yeah, it's a great question. And we were talking about this before the podcast. So, but before I get into that, the one thing I want to say is the organ meats are particularly a source of the bioregulators.
Okay.
Right. I mean, there may be other peptides in there as well, for sure. But there's a reason why organ meats are considered the most nutrient dense part of the animal. And I think that those bioregulators, like the liver bioregulators, will come from liver. Heart will contain the heart bioregulators. So it's a very interesting thing in nature. And if you look at traditional diets, they often would use organ meats to heal people in a therapeutic sense. So that's where that whole organ meat conversation goes. I don't know. I mean, you might get thymosin beta 4 if you eat thymus glands, for example, because that is something that people will eat. Not as much as they used to, but definitely. But for the pineal gland bioregulator, which influences circadian rhythm and melatonin production and all those things, you're not going to run out anywhere and find a bunch of pineal glands coming from anything, right?
Sure.
So it's a little bit hard to access those things outside of the supplements. But to answer your question on the vegetarian side, I do think that being vegetarian, it's a tough decision, right? Because it's a lot more work to be a good vegetarian than it is. Frankly, you can be a little lazier as an omnivore than you can as a vegetarian. You have to work a lot harder. And, if you look at your family and a lot of the health issues they develop down the road, there's a number of them are related to insulin resistance.
True.
And as our metabolisms change and slow down, if we're not careful, we become more insulin resistant. If we keep eating the same way, we could really take ourselves down the road of a chronic disease that is entirely preventable if we were willing to change our diets.
Right.
So, but there's some really interesting research on that front that I came across recently. There's a woman by the name of Denise Minger, I think it is. And she actually, she has a very interesting body of work. And she was able to show that you could manage insulin sensitivity either by going very low carb high fat and kind of moderate protein, or very high carb but very low fat. And this is the problem, right? Because fat makes the world go round.
Yes.
Fat makes our taste bud happy. Plus, fat also keeps our cells happy, like the right fats, right? So, I actually always thought that was a very interesting paradox and she was written a number of papers, and there's some really interesting data around it. The challenge is that I think that as humans, whenever we go to a very severe extreme is when we start to get into trouble.
True.
And whether you want to call it a paleo diet or a Mediterranean diet or whatever the case may be, I think that at the end of the day, our best path forward that will require us the least amount of work is going to be a relatively low glycemic. So you're avoiding those crazy bumps in blood sugar, moderate protein for most people. Fat is an interesting one because genetically, some people do better with fat than others. So it's a good idea to get some insight into your genes to understand, does saturated fat work for you or is it going to work against you? And then for the carbs, there's never an argument that says that it's a good idea to eat a lot of high glycemic carbs. Like, it just isn't. The problem is that they taste good and they make us feel happy.
Yes, true.
Right? So I think that, the vegetarian question is such an interesting question. It's just, do you have the time to soak and sprout your beans and your grains? Do you have the time to make sure that you're going to get the B12 as a supplement instead of being able to access it through your food? Like, there's certain nutrients that are just really, really hard to get through food when we're not consuming any animal protein. So I'm not here to tell anybody what they must and must not eat.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, we kind of can't argue with nature. If you choose not to eat any animal protein, then be prepared to lean in and do the work to understand, how are you going to get enough protein into your system? How are you going to do it without consuming a ton of processed foods? Because look, tofurkey is just as bad as a McDonald's Big Mac. Like, I'm sorry. There's just it's just not a thing. So you're going to have to be committed to eating real food, and test, right? Do the testing on your body to make sure that you're not becoming deficient in one thing or another. And if you are becoming deficient, then make sure that you're able to do the work to restore those deficiencies.
Absolutely. And, I've been going to functional medicine for years. And finally, I looked at my functional medicine doctor and said, do I need to eat meat? Because this is ridiculous. Like, to run so many deficiencies all year and chase them with supplements and never finally win at them. I was like, I want an A+ report card just once in my life on this blood work and a stool test. Like, just give me the A+. And stool test, I've been able to move. I can do that work. But sometimes certain diets that we choose to be on, we are running on a lot of deficiencies, A, B, D, name the letter or the combination, omega-3, of course.
Yeah.
So, and that's the thing, is these things all contribute, just to bring this home, they all contribute to our foundational health. And so it's so important that if we're not going to adjust diet, which is super important, at least get every other pillar going, use the supplements, reach into peptides or any toolkit you need to. I love Ayurvedic medicine, and I know you have all these great toolkits you reach into and teach about so that you can build that vibrant health that you want each and every day.
100%. Yeah, I love that. I mean, that's what it comes down to. And I think, if we can get peptides back into our realm, they are an incredibly powerful tool for moving the needle when it's hard to move, and even for healthy aging. Right. That healing stack I mentioned earlier, the BPC 157 with the thymosin beta 4 and the growth hormone secretagogues. I mean, for someone who works out really hard to go through a tough training cycle for 8 or 12 weeks and to use this stack, it can help you to recover faster and avoid injury and the whole 9 yards. You'll have to take a break on the other side. But how amazing is it to have access to something like that? Or to someone whose innate immune system is really down in the dumps.
Yeah.
How incredible is it that we might have a tool that can help to really re-engage it and get it back online? So there's lots of different amazing ways to use peptides. And then the bioregulators, I mean, we might need to talk again about those because that's a whole different kettle of fish, right?
Awesome.
And so they're being used right now in a clinical trial, actually in the States,
Nice.
looking to see, can they help to reverse biological age? Can they help to the body to really restore itself and rejuvenate itself at a cellular level? And will it show up on a biological age test? And, the initial data would be pretty promising.
Amazing. That's fantastic. Well, I've loved this conversation today. We'll definitely have to do it again because there's so much to dive into here. Will you share any last thoughts or any last messages or any last biohacking tools that you're playing with right now that you want to share with the audience?
I'm always playing with new tools. It's a little crazy. I mean, I'm sure you know this as well. There's a compound that I think is really interesting called carbon-60 that is also a very powerful anti-inflammatory. It's also a very powerful delivery mechanism for other nutrients. So I'm playing with that a lot these days. I've got on my desk here, I've got a neurofeedback tool that's really interesting. So I put it on for 10 minutes a day and stare at my screen and try to bounce the ball. So I feel like I'm trying to be 11 in Stranger Things or something, trying to be a telepath of some kind.
Yeah.
But that's a really interesting, those are really interesting tools. I am pretty fascinated with a lot of the brain tech tools that used to be only available in clinics and now are becoming available to people at home. But I'll tell you, it's a struggle to weave all this stuff into your day-to-day life every day. It really takes commitment, time management. It's a thing. So you have to, you know what, guys, you have to pick your area of focus. And maybe the answer is that we can't focus on all the same things all the time at the same time. I mean, the brain training, I would say that if we can find that brain training device that really resonates for us and make that part of our daily practice, that is a very powerful thing. But then when it comes to all the supplements and all the gear and stuff, maybe it's a time in a season, like you do 3 months of a certain cycle, and then you move on to something else once you've established your foundation. So
absolutely. I love that message. And I teach that also as tea time is me time. I teach everyone, have a cup of tea every few hours. And with that teacup, do something good for yourself. Take your supplements, do some self-care, check in with yourself on if you have hydrated or eaten properly. So use something, whether it's coffee or your tea, as your anchor.
As an anchor. That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
Yeah,
Smart.
exactly. Well, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it was been a total pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And can you share where everyone can find you?
Absolutely. So my website is kind of ground central. So that's natniddam.com. So that's natniddam.com. And that's where you can sign up for my newsletter. You can find information about my private membership community, which is on Mighty Networks, called BSP Community. And then there is, of course, the Facebook group, which is the Optimizing Superhuman Performance Facebook group. And then there's the podcast, which is the Biohacking Superhuman Performance podcast, that where I'm always diving in with people like you, Shivani, just on diving in into these amazing topics. And on Instagram, I'm at Natalie Niddam. And I haven't taken anything else on because I don't have the bandwidth anymore. There's just too much.
I totally understand that completely. Well, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast today, and I can't wait to do it again.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining me for this episode. Check out our sponsor, Fusionary Formulas, the potent turmeric supplement used by doctors around the U.S. for patients with pain and inflammation. www.fusionaryformulas.com. I'm your host, Dr. Shivani Gupta. For more, visit shivanigupta.com. Subscribe to this podcast in Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Click the follow button or subscribe in any of the apps that you use. That's all I've got for you on the Fusionary Health podcast this week. You have the power to transform your health and achieve vibrant health starting today.